everyone. Today we will be discussing the film Puccini for Beginners. I am Marissa.
Bo. Nick.
And I'm Sarah.
So who actually directed this film?
Her name is Maria Magenti. She has actually directed and written many films throughout her career.
Really? I've never heard of her before. What other movies has she been a part of?
Some of the other films include The Incredibly True Adventure of Two Girls in Love, The Love Letter, and her latest film, Monte Carlo.
Well, maybe I will have to watch some of her films. I really enjoyed watching Puccini for Beginners.
I know, it was really unique and interesting film, kind of like Maria's life.
What do you mean?
Well, Maria was born in the United States but moved shortly afterwards to Nigeria where she was raised. She then moved back to the U.S. to go to college.
Where did she go to college?
She went to Smith College, and while she was there, she studied philosophy and classics.
That sounds so interesting, but how did she start to become a director and writer?
Well, she began working right out of college on television commercials, but she soon realized that that was not what she wanted to do for the rest of her life. So she started writing and directing films.
It sounds like she has had many experiences in her life, and Puccini for Beginners was one of my favorite films that we watched all semester.
One thing that bothered me, though, is that Allegra seems very stuck in her own ways at the start. How does she change over time?
Well, to start her transformation throughout the film, she gets dumped by her girlfriend.
So what part of the plot is that?
That would be the main conflict that she spends most of the movie trying to resolve.
So what comes next in the plot?
That would be the obstacles, which is part of the rising action.
And so that is when she changes?
Not exactly. Her transformation takes place throughout the entire movie.
So then when does she truly change?
Towards the end of the movie, she goes to Samantha's engagement party, her ex-girlfriend.
So what part of the plot is that?
We believe this is the climax of the film because you really see her change.
Does something important lead to this change?
Not just one event leads to it, but she does experiment with different sexual partners to see what she wants out of life.
So these would be the obstacles that you were talking about, right?
Yes, her different partners and her need to make a decision on what she wants is the climax of the film.
I've never heard of any other movies like this one before.
Well, you can compare the movie to Woody Allen's movie Deconstructing Harry.
How so?
They both have different sexual encounters, but ultimately what they want is a single person.
I never thought of that.
But the movies are still different, because in Deconstructing Harry, he didn't end up with the woman he loved.
Oh, and in Puccini for Beginners, she gets back together with her ex-girlfriend, right?
Exactly.
What about the books?
Well, our group found some similarities between this movie and Shipwrecked Body.
What?
Well, they both experiment with different sexual partners throughout each of them.
So then, what is different about them?
Well, in Shipwrecked Body, she didn't really have a choice because she woke up in a man's body, whereas Allegra chose to change her ways.
Puccini for Beginners has me confused.
Why is that?
What's the message of this film?
Well, from the film I have been able to see two lessons or themes. The first is that you can't reduce people to social stereotypes.
How does that lesson pertain to Allegra and her story?
Through the film, it is shown that sexuality is a gray area. Allegra gets lost in her desires when she begins a relationship with a man and then a woman at the same time. During these relationships, Allegra refers to herself multiple times as a lesbian, but continues to have relations with a man.
So sexuality isn't something that can be remotely defined because of desire?
Exactly, and that statement leads into the second theme of the film. Commitment requires more than just desire.
Does this deal with how Allegra couldn't commit until the end of the film?
Yes, Allegra was led by her desires and couldn't commit because she was only in relationships due to her desires and wanted nothing more from the relationships than sexual desires. She learned how to commit at the end of the film when her desires got the best of her and she opened up to her ex-girlfriend.
It's pretty ironic how all of the relationships tied into each other at the end of the film.
I agree. It was ironic how Allegra's boyfriend and girlfriend were exes and she was dating them both at the same time. Also, it's ironic that Allegra ended up with the same woman that she started out the film with.
It got very chaotic for Allegra while she was dating two people at once and claiming she was still a lesbian, even when she had a boyfriend.
Yes, and this chaos was shown through a motif with Allegra's phone, as it was always going off and showed how complicated her life truly was. A symbol that dealt with her claiming to be a lesbian was the salad that she ordered.
A salad showed that?
Let me explain. Allegra freaks out about ordering a salad and leaves the restaurant, but it wasn't because of the salad. The salad shows the stereotype of men and women.
I didn't even think a salad could be that significant. It's very stereotypical, like the theme you pointed out, of a man to order a steak. Are there any other parts in this film that play into male stereotypes?
Yes, there is. When Grace and Allegra were walking on the sidewalk together, Grace was describing how men were aggressive creatures that act impulsively. She was telling why she is choosing women over men now, and while she was telling Allegra this, there were two men in the background fighting.
So these men were symbols of how men really act? That's pretty funny how the film does that. The workers in this Japanese restaurant were also funny.
The Japanese restaurant was actually a motif of the film.
Like the salad?
No, the salad was a symbol shown only once in the film, while the restaurant was shown multiple times throughout the film, like her phone.
Oh, did the restaurant act in a different way than the phone? It wasn't chaotic like the phone was.
That's exactly it. The restaurant was the one stable thing in Allegra's life. She would always go to eat there, and the workers always acted the same way and knew what was going on in her life.
And they saw the craziness in her life and knew how she acted.
Yes. Did you understand the symbol at the end of the film with the old homeless man?
I was really curious why there was a homeless man playing a violin in the middle of the sidewalk.
He showed how alone Allegra was after the engagement party.
Because Grace and Philip found out she was dating them and her ex-girlfriend was also there, that must have been hard for Allegra.
The chaos of her life was bound to catch up to her at some point.
So next, I thought we could talk about the mise-en-scene of the movie.
Well, one of the first things that I thought was cool about Puccini for beginners was that it took place in New York City.
Yeah, it was convenient for all the scenes that took place either at restaurants or at the Opera House. You even got to see some of the parks outside New York.
The acting was also another cool aspect of mise-en-scène that I thought characterized people well. Elizabeth Razer does a great job in portraying Allegra. The way she acts gets the audience to understand the emotions that she goes through during her struggle to choose between Philip and Grace.
She also helped to make this movie funny as well. The way that all of these actors made me laugh was a great feature to the movie. It made this movie feel like a comedy as much as it was a drama about Allegra's relationships.
Another thing that often would contribute to the comedic atmosphere was the sounds for Puccini for beginners.
Yes, the mood of each scene was constantly being set by the background music.
I remember that there was the march of music every time something bad was going to happen to her, like when Philip and Grace finally found out that they were involved in a love triangle.
There was also some saxophone music playing when Allegra was snooping on Philip and Grace. It definitely made her seem sneakier.
And the director even went as far as to change Allegra's ringtone when different people called her. Grace had a funky sounding ringtone, while they gave Philip one with classical music.
Well, that's some attention to detail there. On the other hand, lighting in this movie didn't really contribute to the mood that much.
I guess most of the time the characters are as dimly lit restaurants or at home, so they really wouldn't need to be much variation.
Well, to be fair, there were a good number of bright outdoor scenes as well, but it didn't seem to signify a change in the mood or anything like that.
Well, what should we cover next then?
How about we talk for a while about the narration of the movie? As far as the actual role of narrator, the job is done by Allegra in the first person.
Oh yeah? She really only would do that in the beginning and the end of the movie. It was sort of the way of her to reflect on her relationships and why certain things went wrong.
Other than that, the narration in this movie seemed to follow Allegra's day-to-day life, but there were a few skips here and there.
I thought it was neat how they would break up the narration of the story into different acts. It made the story seem more like an opera than a movie would suggest.
And while we're on the topic of narration, we can also talk about speech and dialogue too. The first thing that comes to mind is the little asides Allegra would have with a stranger.
It was so funny when she went into the sushi restaurant and the two chefs would gossip. Sometimes it even seemed as if it was Allegra just talking to herself as well.
But when Allegra and Philip were in the restaurant and she started freaking out about being in a heterosexual relationship, that was pretty crazy.
I suppose that while it seemed like everyone was yelling at her, it was really just the way Allegra saw all of her doubts about being happy in a relationship with a guy.
That's true. Well, that about wraps up our podcast for today, everybody. Thanks for listening in, and until next time, I guess.